Starting off Monday morning with a few security upgrades to the van. I've had a couple of these steel shield plates installed to prevent drilling into the side and back doors of the cargo hold. And I've also had this little anti-peel bracket installed, which is basically to stop thieves from peeling the side cargo door off and getting access to the van. And we've got another one on the back here as well. Classic Premier Inn setup. So this week we have 2 shoots over the course of 4 days. In this video, I'm going to show you the behind the scenes of the first shoot, and then I'm going to release a second video with behind the scenes of the second shoot. So with this first shoot, it was with a legacy client of mine. It's with a production company who actually gave me my first job in the industry. I worked for them full-time as an editor for about 9 months, I think it was, as a maternity cover position. And since finishing that position, I kept in touch, moved on to a different production company, and since going freelance, they've been a regular client of mine. And the shoot we were doing was a promotional film for a school. We started off the day with doing a couple of interviews, and for these interviews I wanted to utilize a bit of double diffusion just to create a very nice, flattering, soft light for the subjects. I had a Aperture 600D set up with the light dome softbox, and then I was diffusing that a second time with a T-bar hanging a sheet of unbleached muslin. I wanted to use the unbleached muslin just because I wanted to add a bit of warmth to the skin tones, and also because of this first location we were in. There was a lot of wood being used in the shelves, the decorations, so it was naturally creating a very warm image already. And so for me, it just made sense to add that warmth to the way we were lighting it as well. I was then using my 2 Aperture 60Xs, one with the proprietary softbox created by Aperture, using that as a soft hair light, and then I used a second one to bounce into the ceiling in the background just to raise the levels a little bit, because we turned off all the house lights in the location and it was just creating a bit of a dark patch in the back corner of this room. So I just wanted to use the 60X to raise the ambient levels in that corner just a little bit. Using the double diffusion is a technique I use quite a lot for interviews. It's not something I use all the time, but if we're giving a little bit of time to set up, it's something I will try and implement every now and then. For me, I find it's sort of a quicker and slightly more compact way of creating a similar lighting effect that you would get with a book light. However, it just doesn't require as much setup or as many stands, so it provides a much more compact setup and it's easier to travel with. And it tends to work really well. It's a nice way to do it. And even though using a softbox on its own can give you very nice flattering light as well, sometimes just adding that extra layer of diffusion helps quite a lot, especially if you're using a light that's bright enough and powerful enough. If you're able to get that second sheet of diffusion, in this case the unbleached muslin, further away from the light and closer to the subject, it softens the light even more, in my experience, creating an even more flattering light for the subjects. Once we wrapped the first interview, we moved on to our second. We did a unit move to this small hall area, and lucky for us, the weather was on our side today, and the sun was giving a lot of nice ambient levels to the location already. This can provide a bit of a challenge, especially when working with a lot of windows and when the sun is as strong as it was. I was very, very glad to have the Aperture 600D with me on this shoot, because the 300D just wouldn't have been enough. And as you can see from these behind the scenes shots, I actually was having to go without the second layer of diffusion. I can't remember exact intensities, but I think we were pretty high on the percentage levels for the 600D, just to try and get enough levels on our interviewee, and so that we can match the levels of the background without having to blow out the highlights. I think we did originally discuss shooting towards the windows, but it would have just been too much for us to handle. So I decided to shoot against this sort of glass wall section of the location, which provides a nice bit of texture, especially when it's thrown out of focus. And it just meant we could keep the ambient levels as they were, create a very nice image and background for our interviewee, but not having to deal with overexposed window lights that draw the eye's attention away from our talent. I actually ended up using the unbleached muslin this time around as a way to diffuse the sunlight that was coming in, and it created a very nice natural hair light for her. So it's a nice way to work smart and not hard sometimes. But I had a 60X in there as a backup, just in case the sun went behind some clouds. As you may have noticed, I was having a bit of an issue with the negative fill flag there. I think the knuckle I was using must have been faulty, because even though I had it positioned in the correct orientation, where it's positioned to the right, even though it was going down, it should have been tightening itself, but it obviously wasn't. And it was happening so slow by the naked eye that I struggled to tell. There was just a couple of moments throughout the interview where I stood there thinking to myself, I'm sure that flag is getting lower. So I just had to adjust it a couple of times. But yeah, if there's one thing that I've got from this 360 cam is a good way to find when equipment is showing signs of fault, because sometimes things happen so slowly by the naked eye that you can't actually see it. Seeing it in a time lapse, it becomes pretty obvious. And I think these interviews turned out great, especially this second one. I'm really happy with how this one came out. I think if I was to do them again, I would reframe the wide shot on the first interview a little bit, just so that we were a little bit more at eye level and zoomed in a little bit more so that we didn't get any of the ceiling and the whole frame was just being filled by the wooden bookcases in the background. I think that would have been more aesthetically pleasing. Once the interviews were done, we spent the rest of the first day and the whole of the second day filming B-roll around the school, capturing various different lessons and activities that the students get to do. I obviously can't really show much of that, so the most I can show is a quick little time lapse of my camera as I'm running around the various different classrooms, capturing a variety of different shots that will go over the interviews in the final video. In these situations, I tend to run with two cameras. I run with the B camera on a gimbal with a mid-zoom. In this particular case, it's usually the 18-35 Sigma art lens. And then on my A cam, I'm usually going with the 70 to 200, just so I can get a nice mix of shots from wides and mids and then some real telephoto zoomed shots where I can usually shoot from afar and use objects in the foreground just to create a lot of depth that you're not always quite able to get when working with the gimbal on a 18-35mm lens. And being able to run with two cameras just means I can work a lot quicker and provide a lot of variation in the shots that the editor will get to use in the final video. Got the carriage back from Syrup, which needed to be sent in for repair. The issue I was having was that these ball bearings, this whole center system wasn't locking this quick release plate into place. I would pull the lever and they would, very much like this now, it's obviously not in there, would not lock it in place at all. So I had to send it in for repair and just got it back and it's now working perfectly again. Happy days.